And, uh, and once again, we will begin. As I mentioned, Chris will be joining us, and we will be a little bit do things a little bit different. But before we begin here, as usual, we do like to begin our sessions with the land acknowledgement. The video we have to accompany our land acknowledgement is one that you may have seen before. It's by Robin Kimmerer, author of Braiding Sweetgrass, and the video is The Honorable Harvest. We think it's a fitting time for this time of year when we can see the combines and all the fields turning and combines harvesting the grain. And of course, we just had Thanksgiving. So we hope that this video, it's a bit longer than usual ones. It's 4 minutes, but we think it's worthwhile to watch this time of year to really get us into that zone of really being thankful and being grateful for the things that we have that the earth provides us. So we'll just get this going here.
If I could choose just a single element of the traditional teachings that we're called to pick up, it would be the teachings of the honorable harvest, which were taught us by the plants who give us everything that we need. It's a covenant of reciprocity between humans and the living world, a very sophisticated ethical protocol. One of the first steps of the honorable harvest is to understand that the lives that we are taking are the lives of generous beings, of sovereign beings. And in order to accept their gift, we owe them at least our attention. To care for them, we must know what they need. And at the very minimum, we should know their names. And yet, the average American can name over 100 corporate logos and 10 plants. Is it a surprise that we have accepted a political system that grants personhood to corporations and no status at all for wild rice and redwoods? The protocols for the honorable harvest are not really written down, but if they were, it would look something like this. When you get to the woods, you don't just start grabbing everything in sight. We're taught never to take the first plant that you see, and that means you'll never take the last. This is a prescription with inherent conservation value. And then if we encounter another plant, we ask permission. I've always been taught to address that plant, introduce myself, and tell it what it is that I have come for. If you're going to take a life, you have to be personally accountable for it. I know there are places where if you talk to a plant, they think you are crazy, but in our way, it's just good manners. If you're going to ask, you have to listen for the answer. You can listen in different ways, pragmatically, intuitively. Look around, see whether those plants have enough to share. And if the answer is no, you go home. For we remember that they don't belong to us. And taking without permission is also known as stealing. And the Honorable Harvest counsels that we also take in such a way that does the least harm and in a way that benefits the growth of the plant. Use everything that you take. It's disrespectful of the life that's given to waste it. The next tenet of the honorable harvest is to share it with others, human and non. The earth has shared generously with us, so we have to model that behavior in return. And a culture of sharing, we know, is a culture of resilience. Plant gatherers often leave a spiritual gift behind, but it can also be a material gift. Weeding, caretaking, spreading seeds, helping those plants to flourish. We give songs, we give ceremony, we give our respect, we give fertilizer. Every breath that you take is a breath that was made for you by plants. On the water that you drink, whether you're in an urban setting, whether you're on a remote mountaintop, we still are recipients of those gifts. And if we take the time to be grateful, that brings us into that state of humility, of understanding that we are not at the top of a biological hierarchy, that in fact we are the younger brothers of creation.
Not too sure if how many of you perhaps have seen it before, but every time I see it, I always hear something new out of it. And it's one of those little videos that I really never tire of hearing. I think one of the lines in there that I think the story behind this message as well is really that close connection, that relationship with Earth, and we know that that's one of the understandings in the first cusp line of this. So can come into play certainly as we look through the Earth systems organizing idea for grade 3. So with that introduction, I would like to acknowledge it because we are across Alberta, people joining us from across the province. We have a more general land acknowledgement that I'd like to share with you. It's in the spirit of reconciliation. We want to acknowledge this gathering is taking place on traditional lands across the province of Alberta, home to the many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. We acknowledge that this land is a traditional meeting ground, giving voice to its original peoples and story of creation of this country in a way that history is forgotten. As I mentioned, we do change up the way we present things from almost organizing idea to organizing idea. The presentation today is going to look a little bit different than if you've seen the Living Systems and Matter, and you've probably seen differences in those presentations. And today we're going to change it up a little bit more. We're still going to take a look at that spiraling curriculum notion, but maybe in a different perspective, just to add a layer onto that. But most of our time will be spent looking at how we can take that idea of the phases of learning and bring it together into a variety of learning activities at the different levels and the different assessment activities that we can use. And that's really the secret to this one, is that we're going to begin sort of, as the old saying goes, beginning with the end in mind. We're going to start with using the backwards planning and looking at some larger, an example of an assessment to begin planning backwards to find out what it is that we need to pull out of the curriculum to move forward with that final assessment piece. So let's just take a quick look at the spiraling curriculum. And once again, those concepts, we've looked at, you've seen this graphic before, that the organizing ideas spiral through the grades, as well as you will probably have noticed after working with the curriculum for a while. If this is your first time, you may have noticed that within the curriculum, some of those concepts keep repeating themselves in different cusp lines or different organizing ideas, and certainly across the grades. And this next graphic is meant to be an example of that. If we were to take a look at Earth systems and some of the big ideas or some of the big concepts that are covered in kindergarten, it would be that we look at the environment. That's the big concept there. And then in kindergarten, students learn that objects is composed of environments, or excuse me, that are objects that are natural or constructed. And for some of the natural elements in an environment include land, water, air, plants, and animals. And humans are also part of that environment. And the environment can be explored through the senses. And senses, we know, is introduced a lot in kindergarten matter, but it's also a heavy concept here in kindergarten Earth systems. And the introduction of change is brought into the picture in kindergarten. And you can see that it's sort of that one of those continuing things that goes to grade 1, grade 2, and definitely part of the grade 3 Earth systems. If we were to move on to grade 2 then, excuse me, grade 1 and out onto that one, that's the brown concepts we've added on there. We'd see that when it comes to the environment, it is our responsibility to care for it. If we have depending on the relationship, it affects the responsibility that you have. So that whole notion of environment and responsibility comes in grade 1. Change is explored a little bit. You'll see that idea of slow change, which we cover in grade 3, is introduced in grade 1. But the slow change is looked at as seasonal changes, and the behavior of plants and animals are the key things. And a brief look at sudden change, but the exploration is really in deep change. When students get to grade 2, if you look down to the bottom left-hand corner, that whole notion of the environment and the objects in the environment is focused into the Earth's components. They're now called the Earth's components. And a close look at water forms and water bodies are looked at in terms of the Earth components. So the different landforms such as mountains, hills, and so on, water bodies such as oceans, rivers, and glaciers, and how they basically understanding of how they work and how they're created and where they're located. But we also have that change component in grade 2 as well, and that's taking a look at not so much a seasonal change, but the year change and how how change like that is related to the sun, as well how day and night is related to changes caused by the relationship of the sun. And finally, when we get to grade 3, we could see the connections really close with the grade 2 curriculum. If we take a look at that bottom left-hand corner, we see that landforms and water bodies are really part of the Earth's surface. And Those are examples of those. And the Earth's surface undergoes, and if we take a look above, change. And when change can happen slowly or suddenly on the Earth's surface. And we're exploring the causes of those changes in grade 3 for the most part. Plus, of course, there's some other things, but these are the main key concepts. At the end of the day, we see that growing understanding about the environment and how change is in the environment and our role in that change is slowly developed as we go from K to 3. Grade 3 specifically, tried to draw a picture of the entire organizing idea through this graphic, through this concept map. Let's do a quick read through of it. This is available to you. We'll be giving you the slide deck near the end of the presentation, PDF, and so you'll have this information and all the links that go along as well will be available to you, because we'll have lots of links in the slide deck that you'll want to access later. But briefly then, when we take a look at the Earth's surface, that's where we begin here. The Earth's surface undergoes change, which happens over time. It could be a sudden change, and we have some examples now in grade 3 of talking about earthquakes briefly and volcanoes, not getting in depth to them, but examples on the surface level. And we're talking about change on a long period on the surface, such as glaciers and so on, or glaciers melting, rivers changing course, and so on. The effect or the causes of change, if we go to the left here in the yellow, that's all related to the causes of change. That's a good chunk of time. This curriculum or organizing idea is related to those causes. We look at how wind, water, plants and animals, and human activity can cause changes to all of these things, all the surfaces of the Earth. And finally, we do take a look at soil, and soil is connected to the idea of layers, that there's changes over time, and that's where we get the layers of the Earth developing. In other words, the Earth's surface is composed of many layers. One of those layers, if we go up, is soil. And so we explore what soil is, and we find out that it is a habitat for plants and animals. And while we explore the idea of layers at a whole notion of time, we take a look at how the fossilized dinosaur bones are in those layers and what that tells us about the history of our planet. So in a nutshell, that's what we're looking at. But again, just a graphic to show how the ideas in this organizing idea are connected and how that connects to the other organizing ideas as well. This is just a quick look. You've seen this once before. All this does show is that if you take a look at this document, which is available to you, there's a link at the bottom. You've seen it before, perhaps because we've shared this before. Again, just another way of showing how the different concepts reappear from grade to grade. In this particular case, it's the environment being explored and brought up in kindergarten, but again, a key concept in grade 1, and again in grade 4. Change shows up along the way as well through the various grades. So if you're interested in that document to see what comes before, it's a nice short way to see the concepts or ideas that are developed before and what students should be coming in with. And I give you a sense and idea of what you may want to focus on for students to really make sure they carry forward into the next grade. I'm just working on one screen right now. So if there is something that appears in the chat box, I may not be able to see it. So if you do have something to say or you want to interrupt or ask a question, by all means, feel free to do so. Again, I'm not able to see my little chat box. So if your hand is up or if you have a question, I won't see it unless you unmute yourself and ask. Briefly, let's look at skills and procedures again. We know that they're the things that the kids do. Students do these things to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding. And the various things they do are identified in this graphic, which once again we shared to you before, but I want to add a layer of understanding onto that. There's a link to this document here that breaks things down a little bit more, but this document shows all the skills and procedures that appear in the curriculum, either in the learner outcome or in those skills and procedure statements. When it comes to grade 3, the learner outcomes include these verbs: analyze, describe, explain, investigate, and relate. Of course, relate or investigate is the key thing with the key verb with the scientific methods, organizing idea. I'm trying to remember where the computer science organizing idea verb comes in. I don't know, but the verbs are all transferable. We can carry to investigation not only in scientific methods, as we know, but we see that verb appearing several times in this organizing idea. So we're going to come back to seeing how we may want to do that. Relate is another one that shows up many times in this organizing idea, as well as their learning outcome. And we'll share some activities maybe of how to help develop that and move it along the way. But that's just the learner outcome. In the skills and procedure statement, we know that there are many more verbs mentioned. In this particular case, if you just look at the yellow ones, in the cusp line, the third cusp line, that has the understanding of plants, animals, and other activities can cause changes to the Earth's surface. These two verbs are used: relate activities to changes on the Earth's surface, and relate activities to plants and animal changes in the Earth's surface. But when we take a look at all these verbs in this list, we know that they all are high frequency verbs. All these verbs show up on a K-3 level. They're the most frequent ones. So asking questions is something that would be expected. It's introduced in kindergarten, but it would be expected to be done in 1, 2, and 3 because this is the first step of an investigation. The pink highlights here mean that the verb is not specifically stated in the skills and procedure statement, but we can expect that students should be doing those things because it's the first step. We take a look at investigating when it comes to scientific methods. All these skills are important, as you can imagine, not only in science, but to compare and contrast, to relate, to conclude, to discuss and examine. They're useful skills in every course that we do. So we see them appear in science, but we could probably find them in math. You'll probably find some of those in your Pew curricula. You'll find them in your language or ELAL curricula, math, and so on. So when we work with them and try to introduce them and tell the students what these skills are and that we're going to use them, doesn't only belong in science because we do use them all over. Nonetheless, we can use them all over because skills themselves are transferable. So even though compare is not used in this cusp line, and that's why I highlighted it at this point, even though it's not in this cusp line, it's still an important skill for students from K-3 to learn. And it doesn't have to happen just where it appears in the skills and procedure statement. We can easily insert compare and contrast in this cusp line so that we now have compare activities of plants and animals to changes on Earth. And then you'd create some criteria and compare them rather than just relate the activities, just to give students more practice in using those skills and giving them a new context to demonstrate their understandings to us, because that essentially is what the skills and procedures does. It provides students an avenue to show what they know. Very briefly, again, that understanding is composed of those individual concepts that we showed you earlier, all those in that concept map. So we take those concepts and we learn them individually in the knowledge section. We learn what human activities are. We learn a little bit what changes. We know what the Earth's surface is. We learned that in grade 3 with the land, plants and animals, water bodies, and air. And then we get to the understanding and we relate them. In this particular case, we can relate those 3 concepts in many different ways. The one that we chose, or the one that the curriculum has in it, is that humans and other animal activities can cause changes to the Earth's surface. I've highlighted just the human activities because I'm just going to use it as an example that we can just narrow down. We could talk about plant activities causing changes to their surface and animal activities causing changes to the Earth's surface. But the emphasis for my example is just going to be on humans. And so we see all these concepts show up in the knowledge piece, not only in the organizing idea of this grade, but other organizing ideas from other grades in science as well. And the ability to take skills and use it from one cusp line to the other, or concepts or understandings, and move them from one organizing idea to the other, is that whole notion of transfer. And in order to transfer, we have to take, I'm missing a slide, I think. Yeah, that's all right. I'm just going to go back here. In order to transfer, we have to take students from that surface, deep, and transfer mode. This is just another example that concepts transfer. We can see those 2 grade 3 concepts of changing human activities in each of these concepts. And in this example of the green environment or the example of the beach, we get to change those footsteps for there. Humans made them. They'll probably disappear when a wave comes in. We could see understandings in different contexts. We could transfer this understanding that plant, animal, and human activities cause change to the Earth's surface. We can apply it to this context. We could also apply it to these two concepts, even though they're very different. And that's the nature of concept of a transfer, providing kids with different opportunities, different contexts to apply and see and view and understand what they see through the lens of either the concepts or the understandings. So if we do teach for transfer, this is, in a sense, the process that Chris and I are following as we move along. There are certain things we have to teach at the surface level, which are those individual concepts or the knowledge pieces or the skill pieces, excuse me. When students feel good at that, we can get into the deep zone. And the deep zone is when we start taking those concepts and organizing and working with them in the understandings. The deep zone is where we connect the three separate concepts and then give them different contexts to work at it so they become better adept at transferring that understanding to as many contexts as possible. Below, you see that we all can take the individual skills, teach them at the surface level, deepen the use of those skills until students can transfer those skills independently into different areas of study. And finally, the concepts as well. We can teach those at a surface level. We can teach them deeply by moving beyond just the definition, which would be very surface level, to a deeper point of having kids recognize that context in different, or that concept in different contexts, providing and making up their own examples, and then transferring it to new contexts along the way. So when we do talk about planning then for transfer, we are going to unpack this by looking at the end, first of all. What is that assessment sheet that we're going to give our students to do some summative assessments? And if we can break that down, we will be able to figure out what is it that we need to teach at the surface level, bring it to the deep, and have that practice happen before we get to that assessment piece. So that's how we're going to take a look at this. And we're going to begin with just one example. Those big end pieces are the whole learner outcome and the understandings. Those are the things we really want our students to walk away. This is what we really want them to take with them when they leave this organizing idea. One thing about this particular organizing idea and these outcomes I've noticed that the understandings are really smaller chunks of the larger learning outcome. So, for example, we could take a look, plant, human, and other animal activities cause changes to the Earth's surface. If students are going to analyze changes of the Earth's surface, they're going to do these. This contributes to this. We can see that this understanding, if we were to assess, this understanding is going to contribute to the second part of this learner outcome as well. So, a summative assessment in this organizing idea, at least from our point of view, can be done as one big assessment or several small summative assessments that take a close look at the understandings themselves. So I'm just going to pull out one understanding as an example of show what we mean by planning backwards. I have a sample assessment here that focuses on the understanding that human activities can cause changes to the Earth's surface. And really quickly, I'm going to open it up and just give you an idea of what that assessment might look like. And in this particular activity, what will happen is that students will research different human activities. They'll be given an opportunity to look for pictures or videos that show human activity, and then they analyze that information to show whether what the change is to the Earth's surface, or whether that change is positive or negative, or sudden or slow, and then they communicate their findings. So look for examples of human activities that cause change to the Earth's surface, analyze it to conclude whether it's a positive or negative change, or whether it's a fast, slow change. There are some, now what I've also done is I've tied it to the investigation steps. I'm going to click on that really quickly, because when you look at those investigation steps that come from grade 2 that we need to continue on in grade 3, the first step is to ask questions. The next step is to make predictions. The third step is to plan the investigation, observe and record data. And once you get that data, you analyze. And you see that word analyze show up in the learner outcome for this one. So if we get students to gather information about examples of human activities that change the environment and analyze it to decide whether it's a positive or negative change or a slow or sudden change, and they make that conclusion with that, we're helping to meet that learner outcome in the end. I'm just go back to the slideshow. Where did it go? Over here. So in order to do that, though, the question becomes, well, if that's how I know I need to assess my student, what do they need to know to be successful in that assessment? And what are they going to have to be able to do? The slide answer those questions. They need to know what the Earth's surface is, because that's really what we're talking about, is change to that. We're talking about human activities. We are bringing in the idea of slow and sudden change and the positive and negative change. And I'm going to use criteria because I forgot to mention that SAPL assessment, students are going to they're going to be asked to make a decision whether that change is positive or negative. And the question they're asked is, what criteria are you using to decide whether it's a positive or negative, or both? That's another option that appears in that. Criteria sounds like a big concept, and it kind of is, but grade 3 students will certainly be able to understand it. We know the criteria is used in the competencies for grades 1 to 3 as one of the key things students use to make decisions. So if you take a look in decision-making in the competencies in UA Learn Alberta, it does say that students use criteria to make the decisions. So we ask them, what are your criteria to decide whether this change is a positive change or a negative change or a little bit of both? How are you going to decide that? So that's what they need to know. And what they need to do, they need to be able to do is to go through that steps in the investigation and to do some of that research. And so all these things here are things that would need to do at a surface level to make sure kids are good at. Review the investigative part. Can they do it? That'll be some pre-assessment, because they should have been introduced to it in grade 2 and had many instances and many iterations with it. They should have been introduced maybe to some of those research skills in grade 2. If not, we do some pre-assessment and find out. And all these things would happen at the surface level before I provide students with this assessment. Those slides shouldn't be there. So really then, looking back to that whole notion of transfer, the transfer pieces really are a summative assessment. It's those that this is a new context. We're going to have kids apply their understandings and apply their skills to show us what they know and be able to do. So at the surface level, then they are going to have to learn those basic skills that I mentioned there. We also can do some pre-assessment in there, and we can use some of the prior learning that Chris is going to now talk about. Welcome, Chris. Because we know that a lot of the things that student learned to do and the knowledge they gained from the previous grades are really necessary for success in this grade. So there may be some pre-assessment happening at the surface level for prior learning. And Chris is now going to take you to some of those things that students have learned up to this point.
So a lot of the materials, hello everyone, a lot of the materials that we had in previous grades really kind of work up into what we're doing in grade 3 about learning about environment, about learning about the earth, about learning about what people's interactions can do. So I find that this one particular organizing idea really does lean quite heavily on what they've just learned also in grade 2. So what we've provided you with here are some slides that give you some of the ideas of the background knowledge that they have acquired from basically grade 1, a little bit in kindergarten, but basically grade 1 up. And just a touch point for you to double check with your students that they actually have that background knowledge. Like, do they know what an environment is? How would they describe it in their own words? And are we able to handle that conversation with them at this point? So environment would be a big one for them for sure, that we would want them to make sure that they understand, because if I'm going to talk about the Earth's surface, I'm going to talk about influences on the Earth. I really do want them to know what that's all about and what those connections are. So as we move forward, you're going to see things like, you've got control there, Ted, so I'll let you advance them. You can keep going. When we look at just the terminology about this, there was a graphic that we shared this time. We didn't do it in the pilot, but this is kind of a helpful one to bring together maybe some of the things about natural and man-made elements that we find within the environment and how that might affect positively and negatively, because not always going to be negative, for our environmental impacts. And that's also important when we start talking about change over time. Have we accelerated that change, or was the change a natural change that has happened? Was it a sudden change? That's that other terminology that comes in from previous grades, especially from grade 2. So again, just knowing, do they know the difference between natural and man-made? Those would be the next pieces. Okay, we can move on. So again, we'd ask students to think about how do they explore their environments. We were talking about the senses. That starts way back, and they also bring that in through matter. So do they know the senses? By grade 3, we generally know that most of them have that, but are they familiar with which sense they would use to describe and explore the environment when we're talking in that context? And again, it doesn't directly affect what they're going to do in grade 3, but it links and strongly supports their understanding as they enter into grade 3. So those are important pieces that we want them to be considering and looking at. Okay. So the senses information is there. You have a card sort that is included in here if you just wanted them to get an idea of physical change and which physical change might I use a different sense for. That's the information that you have within that slide there. So again, you're only going to grab here what you need to grab, but we're providing you with kind of the big rocks that have happened previous to what's happening this time in grade 3 Earth Science. So you need to kind of go back and grab whatever you feel that the students are missing. Okay, we can move on. So seasons was another one. Those are a natural change. Can seasons affect land? Sure, they can. Can seasons affect what happens in the environment? Sure. If you've been listening to some of the commercials that are on TV right now, they're saying what a beautiful fall we have, but it's kind of confusing the plants because we haven't had a really hard frost. And so the plants haven't really got the cue or the tip off yet that, hey, you better start putting that sap away because it's going to get cold here really quickly. And they need that in order to shed their leaves. They need that hard frost to bring that wake-up call. Otherwise, as they're saying, if the sap is still in there and now it starts to freeze overnight suddenly and gets really cold, that's where we get that winter kill of our plants and how it changes our environments. If we don't have enough snow, what does it do to certain surfaces that we have around us? So again, it's not directly grade 3, but the seasons pick up and fill in some of those little gaps that the students might need as a reference point as they're doing the description of how the Earth's surface has changed. You'll have to go faster through those because they'll just turn on you. So then when we talked about with grade 2s, we looked at what are the components of the Earth. And so we're looking specifically at, and it ties again to the basic needs that they talked about in living systems. So what are those important components of any system that is on Earth? And that would be the air, the water, land, and life. And how do those interconnect to one another? So that would definitely be something that you might want to flip back to if students haven't had a lot of exposure to this notion of surface of the Earth or Earth itself, the environment. Then that might be a good graphic to start with, as the one that we have in the next one too gives them some information about the different landforms. And these are where I would say grade 2 actually is a tight link into grade 3. This slide that you're looking at right now could serve very well in grade 3 when we're talking about different surfaces on the Earth. And in particular, these are directly related to students that live in Alberta. And that's kind of what we wanted in grade 2. It was, can they focus on different landforms that are located in Alberta? But not only are they different landforms, there is time there's stories to be told in each one of these for time and change that has occurred. So if I wanted to look at Cypress Hills, if I wanted to look at Head Smashed and Buffalo Jump, those didn't just come up in the last 20 years. Those are things that have happened over time. The Badlands, another one. How did they create? How were they changed? What were the influences? Was it weather? Was it water? Was it ice? Were they combinations thereof? And then in grade 2, they also talk about some of these sites that are in Alberta are UNESCO sites. And so a lot of our children have never heard of that term before. They don't know that these are World Heritage Sites. So what does that mean? So we can explore some of that from grade 2, but also we can also use some of these locations now if students are keenly interested in a particular area, or maybe they've never seen Mount Edith Cavell before. They don't know anything about it, but it's just a beautiful mountain. I love it. I want to know what about it. Maybe they want to use that as their exploration when we talk about changing our surface, because there I have a perfect Angel Glacier hanging there, and what's happened in the valley and changes over recent couple of years, what has happened with the Angel Glacier, and what's been going on when they had big crashes of the glacier that came down 2 years ago. It washed out the entire road that went up there. So they had to rebuild. They had a whole new riverbed that got formed that nobody could have anticipated, that ice falling into the lake up there would cause a miniature tsunami that came flying down the mountain because it's right up there, and caused all of this change. So those are sudden changes, but that's the terminology that we learned in grade 2. Sudden change had a ramification. It had a change in the surface. What was it? So I think that I would suggest that you keep these slides that you're looking at now, and the ones that are going to come up here very shortly as well, in mind when you're trying to discuss with students what their interests might be when they're looking at those different surface changes. So here is another one again, when we're talking about what are some of the ways that we describe change. We have characteristics of landforms, but again, characteristics of things that I would see, such as slopes. How did the Rocky Mountains form? Why are some of them very steep on one side, very rounded on the other? Again, how did that happen? So those would be long-term changes that happened over a long period of time, and as a result of tectonic plate movement, right? So we have that conversation. Different sizes of landforms. So I have deep valleys, I have shallow valleys, I have little sort of sloughs and lakes, but then I also have these deep ones that occur, such as Pito Lake that you have just outside of Jasper along the highway there. So what is it that created these? What is it that left these legacies? So again, children need to understand that all of these have a story, a historical story that comes from behind. And any one of these also helps us to understand the Indigenous connection as well, because the Indigenous storytelling that occurs throughout a number of these landforms and changes are also very significant in the history pieces of it. This is just a quick graphic, but it's a great activity. Again, if you're feeling that they don't really know about landforms, so it's going to be really hard for them to talk about change. They don't really know a canyon from, let's say, a valley, what's the difference? So maybe this would be one that you might want to start with and just have them go through. We just asked grade 2s to write down the terms that they see right now on the picture. And then as they're seeing them and seeing them explained, we asked them to put that down in their own words. So now I, at the end, would hope that I would know the difference between, let's say, a canyon and just a valley. How are they different? How did they get formed? What is different about each one of them? And again, our things are going to start on us every time we link them in here. They start when we change our screens. And water. This is a really important one that will definitely link into grade 3. When we talk about changes over time, water is a powerful, powerful change agent. And it has, in the history of Earth, made some significant changes in what we see today in our landscapes, and also as tectonics and as continents moved. So one of the things as we start to unpack the grade 3s is we will show them, what did Earth look like over time? Like it doesn't look like it did today. It changed over time. And what did it change from? So we'll talk about how water is enveloped in that as well. And again, here's just the terminology from grade 2. They understand a little bit about glaciers, but now that might be a choice that one of your students has is, I want to explore glaciers. I want to know how a glacier can change the landscape and what does it change. And when we think about the Ice Age, children are fascinated by going back in time and looking at what happened in the Ice Age. And then they learn that not everything on Earth was covered by ice. We have different parts of the world, and Alberta in particular also has its own, where we look at different places where the ice never actually covered the ground. And so what's unique about those areas? So again, it's just that after effect of this discussion in general terms in grade 2, that's going to strongly link into grade 3. You do not have time to reteach all of grade 2, but you do have time to kind of pick on the big concepts and the rocks in there that you see might be of an interest to your students. We want to make sure that they're not missing anything. And again, this is just resources for you to go to. Again, if you need it, I'm not going to go through them all, but they're all linked for you. Again, using whatever you need at this point. Okay, so if we're going to look at some surface level activities, do you want to start on that one, Ted, and then I'll carry on from there?
Sure. This slide is just early a reminder that instructional approaches can be varied. We don't have to do a similar thing all the time. We could use things like the concept attainment strategy. I'll show you some examples here shortly. The Freire model, sorting, classifying, just showing a photo, just a ton of things that you already probably know that you could do at the surface level. So it changes it up for a little bit for the students, and of course, each have their own benefit and way in their own way. Similar with case studies, they could be used at all 3 levels. That they could be used to introduce some ideas at the surface level or to deepen an understanding, or case studies can be used even for a transfer or an assessment piece as well. It all depends on what you, the teacher, has in mind when you're getting the material ready for your students and what phase of learning you're in. What we share with you here, just some sample activities, and there's some more here that aren't here, and we'll see them shortly here. But if we were to take a look at, for example, the sample assessment piece that I shared with you at the start, there's going to be some pre-assessment or some surface level learning that's going to happen before we get students to investigate human activities and how they relate to change, and whether the change is positive or negative or fast or slow. So you can see at the top here, there's a bunch of links here to different, some of them are concept attainment activities, some that are fairly simple, just basic activities, to introduce students to some of these key things that reappear. And as Chris was talking, you probably heard her say change and change and time and a lot of those other things. We know that we're asking students to identify something that might be a positive or a negative change as they explore human activities. And so this activity, for example, introduces students to the notion of what's a positive statement, what's a negative statement. Just sometimes we throw those things out loosely, and students really may not necessarily fully understand them. If you think students understand them, you could take a lot of these activities and just take the last couple slides and use those as a pre-assessment without going through the whole activity, and say, can you give me some examples? Or here's a picture, which would be considered something that has the most, which of these would be the most positive change and which would be the most negative change, and why? And you'll get a good sense of whether they understand those concepts. The whole idea of human activity is interesting because we use it, and it's used right through grade 1, but maybe a stop and explanation about what we mean by human activity might be a good look. And so this activity takes you into, well, what is it? It's something we do by ourselves. Sometimes it could be dancing. It's something we do as a group. And sometimes we do something as a larger group. And oftentimes when we see human activities, we see the actual people doing the activity, but sometimes we just see evidence of human activity, such as a piece of paper on a walk, or just a path without people on it. And so that activity explores that a little bit. This next activity on investigations takes a look at what are the steps in the investigation process. There are 8. Again, it's from grade 2 scientific methods. It's the only time that teachers from grade 3 all the way to 6, that's the only place where they're going to find the steps in the investigation. And you'll see the word investigation show up many times, not only in the skills and procedures statements, but also in the learner outcome. Investigation could be a really deep thing, or it could be something like a research. All right. And if you take a look at this bottom idea here, there's a grade 3 example of how to maybe introduce research as an investigation. Because at the end of the day, the first thing we do with an investigation is to ask a question, then we make a prediction, we plan how we're going to do this. In other words, how we do our research, and then we do our research as the gathering, and then we answer our question. So that's all included here as examples for you to begin if your students aren't there. A lot in this organizing idea talks about relationships. How are things related? You'll see some skills and procedure statements show up that relate this to that. You'll see that word show up. So some backtracking maybe to help students understand what a concept map is, because producing concept maps with students is a really powerful way for them to show what they need. These are really basic, easy ways, I think, to introduce them at the grade 3 level, and certainly at the grade, we've introduced this to grade 1 students as well. And then exploring what some of those relationships are. Sometimes it's a cause and effect relationships, a dependent relationship. Relationships are interactions. So it explores all those ideas around there. As we know, in that very first Cuspine, we see, well, what's the, the relationship of Indigenous peoples to the earth helps them to have an understanding of the earth's history and how it changed over time. So those ideas keep coming up. And as you look through you're planning for your unit and how you're going to teach us, you may see that these words and relationships show up. So if there's some activities, say, well, back up before we talk about that, we're going to help you out and teach a little bit of that. Same with representation. There's a lot of representation of this. So this introduces students to the whole idea of representation. But to fill in these concepts, understanding, we need some content. And Chris is going to unpack for you a whole lot of resources that'll say, that'll guide you to some of those activities and some of that organizing idea-based content that will carry through not only the surface level activities, but take you through some of those deep activities as well. So Chris.
Okay. So really, that's really what I want to provide now, is just a place for you to get some source information. We're not suggesting that every slide here would be something that fits into your unit. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but really, what is it that we need to start teasing out for students? So because we're talking about change over time, a number of the slides you're going to see right now are just that, is what has happened in the earth. So, and you might find it as an adult fascinating to see how has plate movement changed over the last 200 million years. So without going into it all, the video does exactly that. It gives you time-lapse photography to show you what has happened. How did the continents actually break up? What was connected to what initially? So that students realize that our earth is ever changing. And as we go through that, then you might even have them ask questions like we see at the bottom is, how do you think that we might look? And this is completely projection, but if they watch it, how do they think it might look in the next 200 million years? Not that any of us are going to be around. Why is it we can't feel this movement? That would come back to that grade 2 concept of sudden change versus gradual long-term change. This is very long-term change. So of course we don't feel it. We don't feel the earth moving either, because we're moving with it. So that's a starting point for just to, if nothing else, to grab their attention and realize that the earth has changed many, many times already. When we go on to the next slide, we have another bit of information where we look at something a little bit more timely and not over the last millions of years, but from 1985 to 2020. We're looking at how have things changed as a result of our climate change. So what do we see when we have these satellites up above us who've been taking pictures over time? What does that look like? And why do we even care? Why do we even want to worry about whether the glacier is there or the glacier isn't there? So again, this is a video that will talk about what happens in that time-lapse photography, but as you get more resources that you'll see in other slides, part of that will be a discussion about why do we care about our Earth's glaciers? And in Alberta, we are glacier rich and compared to many others, but we're not going to be there for much longer. So then what is that going to make? What change does that make? What effect does that have? So this would be a good example too of how does human activity change the face of the earth? Global warming isn't a result of necessarily all natural states. So then what are we doing and how can we change that? We're not getting into the global warming. We're not getting into the tech, the scientific side of it, because they do that in later grades. But the discussion of that is an impact of human activity and what is it doing to glaciers. So again, another one to watch with students. And then when we talk about volcanoes, children will say, well, we don't have volcanoes in Alberta. We have the results of volcanoes in Alberta. We also have the results of tectonic plate movement in Alberta. But BC has some very definite legacies of volcanoes. So when we look at that, we see how do volcanoes have an impact on our landscape that we're looking around. A lot of times children don't even realize that some of these old mountains that are there are actually and have the potential to bubble over. We don't really have the right sort of landscape right now, and we don't have that kind of movement, but it's like Mount St. Helens. Nobody expected that one to start smoking either, but it did, right? So there are changes that occur that are natural changes that occur over time. And in this case, what are the remnants of some of these volcanoes that have happened over time? And these are also areas where First Nations stories tell us a legacy and a history of that. So that's another component that we can bring into this piece. There are a number of resources that we've been able to find that are a really good fit for Earth systems. This one is an excellent fit for grade 3 and 4. It's called Investigating Landforms. As you see, the little descriptor on the back of it is written there for you as well. These books are coming from the US, but we can access these small books through Pearson Canada. They will get them in for us, and they are part of the publishing company that will work with the teacher-created materials to bring them in. But this one book, Investigating Landforms, touches on every aspect of everything that we have unpacked in the organizing idea of Earth systems in grade 3 and 4. So of all the books that we've seen in most of the organizing ideas, very few of them have hit sort of all of the cusps. This is one of those rarities where it hits the majority, not exactly 100%, but it hits the majority of them. A great little book. So if you're looking for something for your classroom or for your library, that might be one that I suggest you consider getting. In addition to that, if you don't have a lot of materials on volcanic activity, that might be another one. Again, that depends if that was something you were going to build into your activities and into your teaching pieces, or if that would be something that students would have access to choose as one of the ways that the Earth has changed. That would be a very appropriate books to have students use on their own and just read through if they were going to do some research activity. That would be a great one to have in the classroom as well. Also available through Pearson. And then the next couple of slides that you're going to have here are of, I don't want to say present day, but definitely within our century, things that have happened. So we've had some very sudden changes that have changed the landscape, in some case very detrimentally for people. In this case, the Frank Slide was a good example of that, where an entire part of Turtle Mountain comes down based on the fact that limestone isn't very trustworthy. It shifts, it moves, it cracks, it slides. So in this case, a limestone half of a mountain came down and crushed an entire town. Definitely you can still see the remnants of that. You can walk amongst all the rock that has come down, and the history of all of that is labeled there. But again, this is another one in which First Nations peoples were always talking about they would never sleep under Turtle Mountain, and that was well before the slide ever came down. So what is it about that they knew? What is it about that story that was a legacy to this? So again, there's that two sides that we can bring into this. A bit of a video, it'd be a great research project for students to understand limestone, right? Another component or type of rock that we have. More recently, Calgary had some pretty significant changes in their world when they had their flood that came through. And again, this is the power of water. So at the bottom, you see Calgary's flood 5 years later, and the headline at the bottom was Nature's Power and Long-Lasting Impacts. So one of the most logical questions would be is describe nature's power. What was nature's power in this case? It was water. What is the power of water? Some children don't realize how strong water can be, what it can do as it has a pathway, and it'll either cut its own pathway or it'll find the path of least resistance and create an additional pathway. And that's exactly what happened here as the water came down with such fury and such force that it actually changed their riverbed. And I was actually going on a rafting tour with a bunch of people from our office. And the day that we went was the very first time that the rafting tour had opened again after the flood. And when we got into the raft, they said, you know, we're going to tell you, we don't really actually know where we're going to go. And we kind of looked at them and said, well, what do you mean? You guys are the ones who charted this. And they said, because we haven't been on the river yet. We actually don't know where the river went. And it was fascinating to see that we were going down in this water, and the old riverbed was a good 200, 300, 400 meters to our left or to our right, just empty. It was there, but that's where the old river was just a few days prior to that. So that's the power of water. And then when we talk about erosion and we talk about canyons, again, students can investigate that. How does change happen over time? Okay, we go into deep level activities. If I know a little bit about some change now, some of these particular changes over time are rather significant. And again, we talked a little bit about climate change. We looked a little bit about that video about how glaciers are being affected. This is the one for the Athabasca Glacier that you'll find between Jasper and Banff, which has changed significantly. Just in the background there, you can actually see the people on the ice, and you can see the sled in the background. But that used to be right up to the highway. And that is, now you're going kilometers to get out to where the ice is. So not only is the ice receding, but what is the importance of the glacier to us in Alberta? What is it that we are so worried about this glacier receding so quickly? And again, what kinds of things happen when we say a glacier moves? What does that mean, a glacier moves? That's, for some students, they have no idea that it's a physical entity that's moving forward. And it has quite a powerful destruction that it can do. And what kind of rock does it leave behind? And how do I know where there was a glacier when I go hiking and I see something? How do I know that that was a glacier bed? What are the telltale signs? So again, it's changing over time. And the video here, the story that you're going to see is a very interesting one, but there's also a written context in there that you can use. You would probably want to preview that as the teacher before you assign that to a group of students or use it as a class, and decide what component of it that you would want. But it's definitely very appropriate for what you're doing in grade 3. Another one, examples, we have lots of canyons in Alberta, but two of the most famous ones are Johnson's Canyons outside of Banff. Maligne Canyon is a very significant one because, again, it gives us a ton, and we can see by the walls, and we can go across the bridges to see the different layers and how water has changed the area that it's cut through. We see how it's smoothed out some of the rocks. We also see where some of those rocks are very jagged. And that's a very interesting canyon. If students have never seen it before, you can do a lot of it online. But it also comes from Maligne Lake, and Maligne Lake has its own history. It has its own bits and pieces that go along with it. So this is one of those areas that, again, it's home. It's a place where students can see. They could go perhaps with families in the summer and say, hey, I learned about this. I can go see it in the summer, and in winter, they do the opposite. The water freezes and we use it as an ice climbing. And you can also see how the water is freezing. You can hear the water underneath you as you're going. So again, a home-based place where I can see how the landscape is changing over thousands of years as this water has been coming through. And the next few slides would be slides that I would, again, just have a conversation with students. If you are in a farming community, some of these will resonate more than it will for students who come from a community that's completely urban, or one where you're living in the mountains. Each one of you will see different things and the interests will be different. We would encourage students to pick something that they're not necessarily living in, so that they are learning about something that's not necessarily right at their back doorstep and that they can see immediately. But there are lots of changes that we can witness today. Some of these are man-made. We see that we have beautiful prairies. How did the beautiful prairies get there? How did that rich soil get there? That also has to do with glaciers and glacial times. So those are pieces that we would want students to investigate. So if they're really into the farming, maybe that's an area that they look at what happened in that area over this time period.
Maybe I'll just stop in and talk about this one.
Yep.
Just again as a deep learning activity. Just to remind, when we're talking about deep learning, we're talking about taking the skills and having kids practice with them, but we're also talking about now giving students different context to apply what they know and what they see. So they're essentially at the deep level already transferring. The big difference from deep to transfer is the independence and that students have working within that context. So that's what we would often call an assessment. transfer piece, because it hopefully is some material they have never seen before, but using the same skills and the same concepts that they've learned throughout the unit. So in this particular deep learning activity, it's using a video that Chris already mentioned. It's that Google Earth one that I think was the first one that she showed it as an example of change over time. But as students are watching this, you may want to retell it after they've learned some of those key concepts, such as change, what's sudden change, what's slow change, what's a natural event versus a human activity and change. Have them view it, stop the video along the way here, and have students describe what they see as the change, whether it's a human or a natural change, and it's sudden or slow. Some of them will be tough to see because, as Chris mentioned, some of them are dependent on change in the atmosphere, which is causing some changes to perhaps we're talking about the global warming approach. What is that? What's happening there? But they will see the change in terms of a physical change from water disappearing from a lake or things like that. So it gives choosing the chance to apply those understandings of change and their observation skills to this particular context. And the questions at the end have them make that connection between those concepts. As we mentioned, that's part of that deep learning phase.
Okay, and then old versus new, really this is just a bit of a touch point of fossils, dinosaurs. Dinosaurs fascinate kids, and we can have that conversation about why did they disappear, but what do dinosaurs offer us about the history of the earth? What do they give us for information? So not that we want them all to turn into paleontologists, but again, we have different places in the world in which we have certain caches that we find of remnants of dinosaurs that do tell us a lot about what happened in the Earth's surface. So Grand Cache is one of those, Grand Prairie is another one, you have Dinosaur Provincial Park. All of those could be areas, again, that students would investigate from the perspective or the lens of change over time, and what is it that we're getting evidence of that we can draw from that. So again, these are just start points if that's an area of interest to students. And behind that is a possible resource that you might be able to use for dinosaurs that we can use as far as looking at something that you might want to put into your classroom. We'll just advance that one. So digging up dinosaurs, this book is not so much about the dinosaur as it is about what does that tell us about change over time. So it's put out by the Smithsonian. It also is available as one of these little books that we can get through Pearson. So what happened with these resources is we were able to find a number of them, but they're all from the US. The titles were amazing, but we wanted to see them first. And so we had them sent, but Pearson has agreed that if this is something that you want, then you can order it through them. We don't have to go through the US and pay US dollars. It would be in Canadian dollars, and we wouldn't have to worry so much about this. So that's why I'm saying whether it's available through Pearson or not, just so that you have it. So if you're just looking to sort of expand your resources that you have in the library, again, this gives you an option. The next piece just talks a little bit about soil. And I had already mentioned, you know, there are certain areas of the province that have super rich soil. They're the best soil for growing. And why? Why is it different in different parts of the province? Just focused on Alberta, forget about Canada or forget about the world. Just why? Why does that happen? Again, does that have to do with the ice age? Does it have to do with the amount of water flow? What is it? So without telling the students, how are they able to research that? And again, it goes into, was this change that happened over time? Is this remnant of change that is long-term? What is it that gives us rich soil? So you have lots of different sort of starting places in there. The worms are wonderful and amazing animals. That actually came from another grade, but I left it in there because it really is significant, just for kids to understand that soils need certain things. So just, again, depending on what their understanding was, especially if you've got students who are not around growing things, if they're very much from the city and they have very little contact with that, just to give them a little bit of background as well. So a little bit outside of what we're doing, but that's okay. And the next one that you have is actually where you see the link when you go in there. We won't do it now, but this is an entire PowerPoint. The information about the PowerPoint is given to you on the side there, But what it's looking at is soil and weathering. And that is, of course, a change over time. Weathering doesn't usually happen just overnight. It doesn't happen in one season. So what is it that weathering can do? What is it that rain and wind together can do? What is it that temperature and rain can do? So this is a slide deck that you are able to use if that's of any help to you, or bits and pieces of it. Again, or it could be something that we allow students to have a look at, and they use that in their own research, depending on how you're setting up this unit for the students. So as Ted mentioned, depending on how you set up your unit, any one of those ones that we just gave you as a suggestion could be a summative if they've already done a number of different kinds of activities and different kinds of examples. But let's just assume that you used your surface, you've used those kinds of things to enhance their thinking about and getting into the deep. Then I might do this one as a transfer. And again, these are just sample ideas. We're not suggesting they're the end all be all, but maybe create a model or an investigative site. So it could be one of those sites that we talked about earlier, or what you're going to have now is a number of different slides. There are, I believe there's 4 of them with a whole bunch of links on them. So again, students could choose one of those sites and go back and find what was the impact on that site. How did it change as a result of time? In other words, what happened to the earth that resulted in that? Is there anything happening? And this is where you can combine them all. How is current human impacting that particular site? And so again, we can talk about that. So in this case, I might be asking any one of the ones that you see now. We could ask students, is there an impact of wind, water, ice? What is it that created and affected this particular landform that we're looking at, or this particular our area that they're looking for over time? Or students who love dinosaurs, right? They might want to go into that. They might want to look at another natural disaster. Some of those are in the slides that are coming, or maybe it's one that we've already mentioned, or maybe it's one we haven't mentioned, or maybe there's one in your location that would mean something more to them, but it was a result of Earth's change over time, not necessarily sudden change. So what is it that caused that? What is it that led up to that? What are the things that the students could be doing? So these are just examples. They came from grade 2, but I really feel that any one of these would fit well for anybody's interest to just learn about it quickly, but then go back and find out what was it that changed over time? What resulted? How did Dinosaur Provincial Park come to be? It's not just flat and grassy. So what is it? Why is it so significant? Why does it look the way it does? How many years did it take, or how much influence was it, water, ice, whatever, that caused that? Okay, so we're just going to go through these quickly. We won't unpack them. There's a number of different slides. You'll have to click them really fast, Ted, just to get through them all. Cypress Hills, that's an important one because that's the part of Alberta that wasn't covered in ice during the Ice Age. It's unique, right? It has a very different landscape. So any one of those would also be good sources for you. We also have a colleague, engineering, who has been doing a great job of supporting you in getting the computing science. And so a lot of people are concerned about computing science. They're saying, oh, I don't know anything about this. So Ange has created for you a specific short video with slide deck that you can use if you want, with an activity that is specific to grade 3 computing science in Earth systems. She'll come back and do one. She did one for living systems. She's going to come back, do one for matter. So everything that we do, she has created one for every grade in every organizing idea. So you will be getting all of these slides. You will get them shortly into the chat box. We're going to put them in a PDF. And while Ted is doing that, I'm going to show you one of the science curriculum support documents that are already out if you haven't seen them, so that you know what to keep your eye out for in future as well for Earth systems.
So Chris, in order to do that though, I'm going to change host to you so I can work on that background, and
no worries, all good.
you on the list here.
Okay, so there's a number. I've got, actually, we're co-hosts, so I can go ahead and share once you've stopped. So
okay, well there we go.
So below the resources section, you will just have a whole bunch of different resources that you would be able to access at any time. And then we can go from there. All right, let me just take you to, because this will just take us a few minutes to unpack. I'm just going to bring it up for you. All right, so let me get into sharing here. Okay, why are you not allowing me to share? There we go. Okay, for those of you who are not too familiar with the new ARPDC site, remember this is the location where we are posting any previous videos that we've done, anything that's been done so far. So we've done living systems, we've done matter. So just so that you're familiar with that, we want you to, I'm just going to double check to make sure that we're still recording. I'm not sure if we are. Are you still recording, Ted?
I believe so.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,
Yes, no?
sorry. I trying to check here. Things are I'm working one screen and things are covering up when I pop up. So
I know that's we're so used to going to two screens now that.
yeah, so I'm still, it looks like I'm not
Yep.
recording anymore.
No, you are. It is.
It
I've just
is?
checked. Yep, it is. You bet.
Okay.
All right. So at the ARPDC site, if you go to the top bar, and in this case, we're going to select science. Now, just an FYI for you, math K-3 number is already posted on the ARPDC site as well. So as grade 3 teachers, if you aren't familiar with those, you might want to go get them. But again, in here, I'm going to go to science. And you will see that Jordan has put buttons for you already here. It saves you a bit of scrolling. You could put your grade in here, but I'm just going to go to curriculum support documents. And I'm really hoping that it is up. I'm not sure that I see it. Grade 1 is up, grade 2 is up. Okay, grade 3, for whatever reason, is hanging on there. Grade 3 is done, and it has been sent for posting. So what I'm going to do is just show you what the grade 2 looks like so you know what you're looking for. This is where you'll find it. So the curriculum support document, remember, was our sort of attempt to try and support you in one-stop shop. You don't have to go all over, try and find resources. Just, it's not the end all be all. It is definitely not the only thing that you could look at, but on the same token, it is something that we've tried to consolidate as many resources, as many ideas, as many illustrative examples as we can. So very quickly, when you see the grade, it'll say grade 3 on it. At the top, you'll have a sort of an interactive table of contents that you can jump to if you don't want to go through the whole thing. The green bar that's at the top is an important one for you because it will give you, how do I read this document? So if you forget after this, you can just pull this up and that's a quick video that steps you through everything. You also have direct link to the competencies and the numeracy and literacy progressions. This is the Living Systems recording that we did with you as a province. So if you missed it, you would have it embedded in here anyway. It's still on the ARPDC site as well, but we just thought we'll put it all together as a one-stop shop. TED has created excellent science planners and assessment planners, and we saw these for the first time when we did the pilot, and teachers really liked them. So they're in here now, and right below that, the third bullet, he will take you on a short video on how do I use them? Like why do I want them and how does it work? And then here's your concept map for living systems. So when you see Earth systems, you'll have yours for that one up there too. The curriculum progressions, that skill and the concept ones that we showed you, those pink sheets, what gave you all the different skills, that's what these are here, already hyperlinked. They're also in the document. And here is your numbered outcomes document, just an FYI, all of the numbered outcome documents are being dated in the bottom left-hand corner. So if you don't see the date that is stamped on ours on yours, you might want to download a newer version because we're finding errors or finding that there were changes made, then we change them as we see it. So below that, you will have the organizing idea guiding question. and you will have a bit of an explanation again about what transfer is. If you have never attended a session or are not too sure yet about what that is, there's a short video about what is surface deepen transfer. And beside that are 2 summative assessments you are welcome to use, you're welcome just to look at. I mean, this is entirely up to you. When you click these on, they will download in Word form for you, so you can edit, add, delete, change, whatever. This document isn't a mandatory document, it's just there for you to use as needed. These are hyperlinked to each cusp. Remember, you have multiple rows of cusps underneath. So if I've already done 1 and 2, or wanted to go to 4 first, you don't have to go in order. I wanted to start with 4 first. You can click this on and it will take you down. For each row of cusps, I'm only going to do 1. This is the kind of information you will see. So each row of cusps has its prerequisite knowledge. It has a section called misconceptions. So what are likely kids getting wrong in the right from the get-go? Vocabulary section with the concepts. I know, I can statements, and I understand are also found in here. And then below that is your first row of cusps. And you will see that Ted has already broken these out into surface. We're kind of doing the surface pieces. What are the surface knowledge components? What is their surface skill that kind of goes along with that? So when I'm just teaching the foundational pieces. And then here you'll find in the center column, sample surface level activities. Some of them you saw in our video, but there's a lot of them that are absolutely brand new here. And we are not suggesting you would do them all. You need to kind of go through and find what resonates for you and works with the unit the way you've set it up. But there's lots of examples in here that you can do with a bit of an explanation beside it, and they go all the way down. They also have, where possible, we have Indigenous infusion. So we've already completed this, has now been done. These will be updated on a regular basis. So you always have to check back and see if there was something else that's been added. We're not going to highlight it. We're not going to send out emails saying new updates to, you just need to check back and see how it's going. But we do have Indigenous knowledge already now infused in here. Other resources that appear here are related directly to your cusp. There's another section called Other Resources, and they're more general about this organizing idea, but they still would fit into any one of the cusps as well. Beside this, you have the scientific method, and you also have the curriculum computing science. This is the same video that we're just showing you in our slide deck. So these are also things that were created by Edmonton Catholic that link very well into what we are just talking about over here. And then over on the right-hand side are all formative assessments. Again, you can choose to use them, choose not to use them. This is not a mandate. This is just to try and make your life a little simpler, to have things ready for you to use when you're just trying to do a formative assessment. So it will go on like this all the way down, and then we will move from surface into deep. So you see that the understanding has come into play now, and we see that we have this section of our skills. In other words, we're now getting into the components where I've got that foundational knowledge and I'm wanting to move a little bit further into that. So here are some sample deep activities. Again, it depends on the order that you're doing things in, what you're going to grab and what you're not going to grab. And beside each one of those are also potential formative assessments. We'll keep adding. We encourage you to send us. If you have a really neat activity that really worked well for one of these and you're willing to share it with your colleagues, send it to us and make sure that it's copyright free, but send it to us and we will post it in here. The more we put our heads together, the better this is for everybody, and we get more resources that way. Below that, you have Indigenous related resources, and then there's a section in general. These are specifically related to your cusp that you just taught. And then as you start to move down, they relate, but they're also very general for grade 4. And so there's lots of them that are listed in here that you could possibly use as well. And on the right-hand side, you have the resources that were created by other school divisions or other entities within the province of Alberta. This too has grown since we have put this one up, so there'll be more added on to that. As you're seeing, this is a pretty big document. This is only one organizing idea in grade 3. So you have one for every organizing idea. You have one for matter, you have one for earth systems, will be coming, all of those. The section called primary connections. In Australia, they had a very robust way that they went at looking at supporting their teachers, and they created something called primary connections. In a large number of cases, they are a match to our organizing idea. So if you do see something in this section here, I encourage you to click on the links and just read through the pieces that would be relevant to you for that particular organizing idea. But they are phenomenally done. They have assessments, they have lesson plans, they have activities, they have PowerPoints. Like, they really didn't spare anything when it came to what they were doing in support. So in that case, we're going to leverage that. We have permission to use those, and you can take those components. They're all for us to be able to access. Gizmos is another one. If you're familiar with Gizmos, they are interactive sites where students can take what they're supposed to learn in that organizing idea and go through an activity that's already been created for you. Again, a Gizmo, if you've never been at one, you should do one on your own first. If you think you're going to assign it to students, go through it first, because you really do need to know what's in there so that students aren't running up to you and saying, I don't know what to do with this. And you're trying to figure out what exactly this is because you haven't had a chance to go through it yourself. So with a Gizmo, I strongly encourage that you take the time to go through it. Decide if you want to use all the activities, if you want them to do all the activities or just parts of them. So now you'll see that we have a second row of CUSP. All of this stuff is repetition, but it's all new information. It's not the same stuff that was at the front. This is now specific to the second row of CUSPs, new set of sample activities, etc. So this is a fairly big document. It'll go on until we get down to the very bottom, which is basically at the end of the last CUSP. It went to 1.4. And once you've gotten to the last row of CUSPs, we will have a section called Literature Connections. So if you are looking to grow your library, you're looking to grow your classroom resources, we have listed for you whatever books we could find so far. There's more coming, but what books we have found so far that are specific to living systems. We will even tell you when you look at the grade 3 one, it'll say this one fits with LS 1.1 or 3.1 or whatever it is, okay? It will show you which connection it has or multiple. We also have put down whether or not it had a YouTube connection. So maybe it's already a read aloud that you could access. If it's an epic book, we also put that word in here so that you know to go look for it as an epic book. So for those of you unfamiliar with epic, that just means that you really could just use it online. You could read it with the students online. It isn't one that you necessarily have to purchase. You might want to save your money then for those that are not listed as one of those. So whatever we can find to date, so there's an example of an epic. You know that this book in particular, Animal Mothers and Babies, fits into LS for grade 2, 1.2, second row CUSPs. It is an epic book. It's also available from Pearson. So this is how you would read this document when you get the grade 3 one posted. We want that kind of information to be available to you. There will be another one coming out for matter. There'll be another one for earth systems. There'll be another one for energy that we have coming up in November as well. So hopefully that document will be helpful to you. And as I said, we're really looking forward to you sharing with us any ideas that you have, critique, give us some feedback. If there's something you think we're missing, whatever kind of info we can get, the richer that becomes. Are there any questions at all about anything that we've shown you? Anything that is, maybe you had questions about the slide deck? You can just unmute yourself or you can throw it in the chat, whatever you feel comfortable with. I'm going to turn off the recording so that you're not being recorded.